Poet Talk, a podcast where poets talk. I'm your host, Jody Chan.
And I'm your host, Sanna Wani.
This week, we're talking about trees. Through trees, we'll explore questions like, how do trees move in time? The life of trees in and beyond metaphor, how time structures long poems and collections, and getting into the nitty-gritty of the craft of narratives that we use to understand, to document, and to observe our world in all its forms.
To set the tone for our conversation, I wanted to share some important knowledge and research and practices related to trees. Trees have long been a center for revolutionary struggle, thinking of the olive trees who experienced Israeli settler violence in Palestine, the symbolism of chinar trees of Kashmir, and the very name of the city of Toronto, Takaranto, the Mohawk word meaning where the trees are standing in the water. Since time immemorial, various First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous communities have been doing controlled burns to aid the livelihood of our environments, particularly in forests and savannas. If anyone has recently visited Hyde Park, you may have seen burn marks along some of the trees and grounds. This was because on April 17, 2025, the Indigenous Land Steward Circle completed a traditional and prescribed burn, Binak Zigwok Anishnaabeg, meaning the responsibility for a cleansing fire by all Native peoples, in Hyde Park and South Humber Park. This ceremony centered this year's burn, marking a shift towards long-term efforts and planning centered on Indigenous knowledge. Joining us to talk about trees is Farah Ghafoor. Farah Ghafoor is the author of Shadow Price, House of Anansi Press 2025. Selections of her debut won the E.J. Pratt Medal and Prize in Poetry and were finalists for the CBC Poetry Prize and the Far Horizons Award for Poetry. Her work has appeared in art exhibitions, magazines, and anthologies such as Who's Afraid of Labor Justice, The Walrus, and Halal If You Hear Me, Haymarket Books 2019, as well as post-secondary course syllabi. Raised in New Brunswick and Southern Ontario, Farah resides in Takaranto.
Farah, I think I first encountered your work at Who's Afraid, a local Toronto institution reading series organized by another dear friend and comrade, Furkan. And I think you read Here Grass and some other poems of yours that are in this collection, actually. And I was so immediately taken by your work and the way it holds both the micro and the macro and documents and witnesses and cherishes so many parts of the world with equal weight. So I'm really excited to talk to you about your book today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for having me too. I'm glad we met in that way, where you could hear my best poem at the time.
Yeah. I don't even know where to begin when it comes to you and me. I think we knew each other online, and then we went to lunch, and then I feel like I've just been talking to you ever since. I think you're a poet whose work I turn to get really in touch with the earth and its beauty, its treasure, but also when I want to feel like I need to think about things in a more practical way alongside the beauty. I feel like you have this precision and this economy of attention that allows for your poetic voice is so wise in so many ways. So I turn to, lately I put the little postcard of the snail on my fridge, which is my famous spot for putting my favorite poem. It's the place where I read it every morning. So I've been generally thinking about that poem a lot too. And yeah, I don't know, you just have, I'm always in conversation with your work in a way. Your work helps me live a better life, and I'm grateful for it.
Oh, wow. I'm flattered. I love that you have the snail up on your fridge, because I feel like that's a poem that I've been getting a lot of feedback about. And even from people who don't read poetry, they're like, oh my God. Okay, my cousin's daughter was just like, this is emotional blackmail.
I was just about to ask, what kind of feedback?
Positive feedback. People send me pictures of snails they see after the rain.
That's so nice.
And I love that. I was like, that's my kid, actually.
That's your poetic impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a proliferation of snail imagery in the world.
It's a great impact. Would you like to start
Yes. The snail. You're going to die, I said to the garden snails on the path as I rushed through the rain toward the car, late as usual. I stepped back for a moment, then, and knelt, lifting by its shell into the grass the first snail, like a millionaire selecting a child to sponsor. The second, gracefully en route to the yard, I left where it was. When I returned from that dissatisfying lunch, the sky the same threat of water, I remembered the second snail, its nearly blind eyes raised like the heavy heads of flowers, only to see in its place dark, crushed petals. That shell so small it could contain my life. The shell that said, "You cannot continue to live like this." You know, after I wrote that, I was just like, millionaire? That's so Batman core.
That is the line that really I remember every single time. Like a millionaire selecting a child to sponsor.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, yeah, just the insidiousness of benevolence or something, or the way that power structures our relationships with everything in the world, even when you're not really thinking about it, but it's always kind of looming there, like you're looming over this snail.
Very, I mean, she's already here, but very Solmaz also. Like, Solmaz.
Wow, that's like the biggest compliment you could give me.
No, it really is. It reminds me of the way with the essay that is no longer anywhere. R.I.P.
Which one?
Erasure one.
It's gone?
It's gone.
It's gone.
I know. This is really sad news. I know.
What are we gonna do? Internet Archive Wayback Machine?
I'm sure someone must have
It must be in the
a
Wayback.
PDF.
Yeah.
We'll ask our contact.
I wonder why it's gone.
It's my emotional support essay, honestly.
I know, yeah. So, that scene in that essay where she's washing her hands or like doing the dishes, that reminded me of like the kind of mundane ways in your work that I think you pick up on power too. Yeah. I'm fascinated that this poem begins and ends with dialogue to yourself, like thought. You're going to die and you cannot continue to live like this.
I think what I've been trying to avoid is projection. And so in this poem, I feel like you can tell me if I'm coming off the wrong way, but this, like the dialogue at the end is, I think it's very clearly projection on the part of the narrator, on the part of the speaker. And that's something that was important to me because I feel like we assigned feelings and like narratives to things that might have their own feelings and narratives. And so I think making that clear to me, at least in the end, is important because I want to make sure that the reader knows too that this is a clear act on the part of the speaker.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does come across to me that way when I read it.
Good.
And yeah, that last line, "You cannot continue to live like this," also reminds me of, there's another line, I think it's in the plot actually, which we'll talk about in a bit, that says, "This trail of thought could unravel a life." And yeah, just this way of attention, or this thing that I really admire in your writing too, that you were just talking about, of being able to write so carefully and attentively about the world, but with this effort not to project or to anthropomorphize or to, again, make the human or the person of the narrator the center of everything, while still noticing and caring for the personhood or the beingness of other creatures. Yeah, but that line kind of really echoed with this trail of thought would unravel a life. Like that way of living really echoes or resonates and like requires kind of transformation.
I think one of the things I appreciate the most about how you write about like nature and animals in particular is that you almost are like determined to protect their dignity in a certain way and like push, not use them for your work. Like I feel like there's this intense feeling of protection when I read about, you even hear like the heavy heads of flowers, or there's the dark crushed petals. Like there's different ways that I think you will acknowledge and love the world, but I think there's this comportment in your poetic voice that holds it almost at an arm's length, or like doesn't want to sentimentalize it maybe, that I really, really respect, because I think it's like pushing against just this like kind of politics of witnessing almost. Like you don't want to be like co-opting it into like, and so I love the world and so that's enough. It's like, no, that's actually, the point is that it's not enough. The point is that you cannot continue to live like this.
There's something I wanted to ask you about, if that's okay, in this poem, that maybe will segue us also into talking about some other ones. But this is the first poem in a section called Time. And I was thinking about time in this poem and how there's all this like dangling punctuation, kind of this sense of the commas at the end of the line, the em dashes, the periods, that there's a lot of kind of hanging and waiting and feeling of suspension here. And I was curious about, its place in this section, time, and how you think about time and pacing and speed, and what you use in poems to kind of create that feeling of time that you're aiming for.
Yeah, I actually didn't want those commas there. No. I mean, I eventually did settle for them because I thought it would be also easier for the reader to pace themselves with. But typically, I've always been in the school of thought that if there's like a line break, you don't need a comma there because there's an automatic breath or pause. And I think the way that I use punctuation and the way that I try to pace or maintain a pace in the poem, I think I'm always thinking about the reader and how they're going to be taking in information at a certain pace and within a certain logical order. And so I think that is my biggest priority when I'm thinking about punctuation. And yeah, honestly, I don't have too much to say on that. Yeah, Sanna knows. She's like, she texted me when she was copy editing, like, your commas are so inconsistent. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's new information.
I was just going to say, I have a really special relationship now with this book, I think, because I copy edited it. And because I know you so well, and I copy edited it. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I did notice that you use commas very uniquely. And I think that even just hearing you talk about how you think of line breaks helps me understand that more too. And one thing I actually wrote in the style sheet that I wanted to bring up when Jody said that was that I also noticed this kind of overhang in a lot of your stanzas or your line, like the way you would write a sentence would often overflow stanzas. Like it would happen many times where there's just this feeling of like hanging over something. So I found that really interesting that you also picked up on that, Jody. And I think you use commas beautifully also. just so we're clear. It's very clear that you're like, I always think about Sanna Sharif, who's like a local Toronto writer who I think tweeted once that commas are not about, that just like commas are about breath. Like commas are about where you take a breath, and I think you're thinking of it very similarly. So.
Yeah.
I think I belong to the same line break school of thought, generally. And I learned that from Denez Smith, who was my first poetry teacher at a workshop, and said a variation of that when there's a line break, there's a feeling of pause or breath, and you don't need to, it's almost redundant to put in a comma. But the way that it happens in this poem, is very intentional, and it really works. Yeah, with that feeling of overhang. I like how you put it.
Do you think it's actually then an American thing?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have
American poetics.
We have a very interesting. I think we're three very like cusp poets. Not to. I think we all of us are deeply undivided, maybe. Kes Mohammadi once came to my house and looked at my bookshelf and went, "But they're all Americans." And I was like, "Oh no." Okay, really sorry about that. Sorry for being a Canadian quote unquote poet that loves or takes a lot of inspo from Americans. And I'm projecting onto both of you that I think you're both similar. But
no, absolutely. When I was like trying to learn how to write, I would only read. Well, it's not like I would intentionally only read Americans, but I was in this mentorship program in high school, and that was American, and so I was doing it online. And from there, I was encouraged to submit to different literary magazines, and most of them were American because obviously they don't really know about Canadian ones. And I mean, there's few. No, it's no shade to Canadians. It's just there are fewer and there's smaller, and so that's sort of where I was learning how to write.
yeah.
This is like the opposite of elbows up right now.
So true. So true. Elbows down when it comes to poetry.
Down push Canada.
I was going to ask, I'm really curious. I would love to transition us to the topic of time in general. And I am really curious about the epigraph that you chose for the time section. I just actually noticed it. Richard Siken's "I have seen your true face, the back of your head." Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so initially this was supposed to be the epigraph for the Dream Eaters poem, which used to be called "The Last Poet in the World." Actually, maybe no. I think it was another poem. I think it might have been Birthday Poem. And so what I was so struck. I love his work in that one book where he talks about art and representation. And it's called War of the Foxes. And so this poem in particular, he's talking about what it means to paint somebody and what you hide and what you put under a spotlight. And so for me, that lends itself to the idea of when we're trying to like display something that's unfamiliar to an audience. And so, for example, if that's like a painting in a gallery, what like that might be where the light shines. And so when I was thinking of adding this epigraph to this section in particular, I was also thinking of the idea of neglect. And so that was early on in this section when I was just like, oh my God, the previous generations have ruined the world for us. And that idea, alongside the idea that the Western civilization versus other societies, there is a difference in how we perceive time. Like, for example, here we think of time in front of us and the past behind us. But like, and I can't tell you exactly which societies think of it this way. I saw a graphic online, and for example, like they might think of the future above you and the past below you, or the future behind you because it's unknown, and the past in front of you. And so that kind of movement and that kind of imagery, I felt could introduce this section and what I wanted to highlight.
Oh, I love that idea of just different imaginaries of the direction of time around you. Is there, how would you describe the relation of this book to time? Be then like, where is past and future in relation to?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was also a journey for me to try to understand time in a way that it's so vast, and it's all, and yet in our daily lives it feels so. It feels like it's slipping through our hands, and so I wanted to hold tight onto time, and I wanted to fixate ourselves in history and like the millennia that we are living in. And so the only way to do that, I felt, was to search for tangible items and people in the past and in the future. And I write about this a little bit in the plot too, because I'm obsessed with old growth trees. Yeah. And because to me that is the past, very tangible and touchable in front of you. And I think if we were more exposed to that in our daily lives, then I think it would be a lot easier for us to grasp the climate crisis and be able to understand our place in time and our role in the world.
Do either of you know that Walter Benjamin?
I was definitely thinking about the angel of history.
The angel of history looking back, but what is it?
It's that the Walter Benjamin's angel of history is that they're kind of facing into the past and their back is to the future, and they're kind of flying into the future, but with their kind of face towards, facing towards history.
Interesting.
You have to tell me about that after.
It's a little critical theory digression.
Maybe.
But I liked your reminder that it doesn't necessarily, that's not the one orientation between history and future. That actually, and to think about time as something like tangible and touchable in objects, locating it in objects and in people or in like events, encounters too.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me that time is such a concern of your work. Actually, this is occurring to me like right now as an epiphany, that time is such a concern of your work because your work also, like we've kind of touched on ecology and nature, now we're touching on time, and then the third element I feel like that's ever present is like the economy or like money or different things related to that sphere. And it makes sense that that's so connected to time too, in the way that nature is, because like capitalism is in some ways defined by time. Like there's an understanding of time that implements different other things like that then govern, like, I don't know, how we think of our lives, how we think of what our lives are worth.
So actually, there's two long poem sequences in your book, one called The Plot and one called The Last Poet in the World. And in The Last Poet in the World, there's a line, "With precision, you can create time," which I feel like is a bookmark on this part of our conversation that we're having right now about the relationship between time and poetry. And I'm curious if you would speak a bit more about the relationship. We've been talking about it already, but between long poems and time specifically. And in particular, I'm kind of curious about where the long poems are in the book, like kind of at the center, and maybe this imagery of them being like the trunk of a tree, the body of this collection in a way. And just wondering if you, any thoughts that sparks around what you wanted their place in the book to be and how that's part of the structure of the collection as a whole, those two long poems.
So when I was trying to decide where to put these two long poems, I was looking at the tone and I was looking particularly like how the reader would feel at the ends of the different poems. So I believe in the first section, I end that section with birthday poem. And so that poem ends with, I'm going to die with all of you. And so what I was thinking about putting The Last Poet in the World in the second part, because I felt like it was a natural transition to like the individual role of maybe the artist and the poet. And I also felt like it was not as heavy as the plot, and like in terms of research and how long it would take to actually read it. So it felt like a looser, long poem to me. And it also helped build up the reader's like reading stamina up to the plot. And when I was trying to, I guess, pace myself when I was writing the plot and the last poet in the world, I actually write these poems separately, or it was a bit different for the writing process for each of these. I was writing the last poet in the world, those sections, in like over a longer period of time, and it was one of those instances where I felt like I had like a lot of overlapping themes, and it felt like I could create a narrative out of them. And I guess that's the more typical way of putting together a long poem. But in the plot, it was a huge emotional journey to even start, because I knew it would be so much work, and it ended up being so much work. And so when I was writing the plot, I guess there were certain ideas that I needed to put together and understand for myself. And so that was like the guiding hand of trying to order these ideas and intertwine them. And I felt like I wanted to take the reader on a journey, the journey that I went through, in order to understand what has really happened and why we think this way about the world. And I guess in terms of pacing for the plot and for the last poet in the world, I was still approaching, because I was writing them sort of in pieces and very slowly, I was still prioritizing precision. Like I was still approaching it like a normal poem, like that would be one page. And so that did take a lot of time. But I feel like that's what might keep the reader's attention. Right?
There's in an episode of Versus, the poetry podcast that we're referencing all the time, the poet Yin Yi said something about how ordering a collection for them is like DJing by feeling. You know, what you said of the transitioning from birthday poem into the last poet in the world and into the plot, like how you're leaving the reader feeling at the end of each poem and what maybe feels right or fitting to come next. And the way that you're talking about structuring within the long poem itself also reminds me of that. Like you have all these different pieces. It's like you have all these different tracks. And when you're DJing, kind of choosing which parts of the track to lift up or suppress or amplify, kind of like that not all the research made it in, but you kind of had to make these choices about what to include and disclose versus like what would have more of a poetic impact.
Yes.
Or that precision of craft that you're going for reminds me of that, which is cool to think about your process of composing a long poem in that way.
Yeah.
Kind of said for the plot that the organizing principle, it sounds like, was this is the journey that I went through thinking about these things, and so this is the journey that I want the reader to go through. Was that a similar kind of principle for the last poet in the world, or is there a different organizing kind of?
For the last poet in the world, it was less about the journey and more about the narrative arc. And so in those like different sections in the last poet in the world, I was also thinking about the beginning and the end and the information that the reader is getting from each section and what they're slowly learning about the last poet in the world.
I'm curious about how our conversation relates to like your thoughts on form or poetic form in general. I mean, the long poem is such a beast of a form, and I'm in such admiration of anyone who's able to like wrangle it in a certain way. So yeah, I'm curious just in general if we could transition to thinking more about craft, narrative, if it also informs form. Like, I'm not sure which way that relationship works, if narrative informs form or form narrative.
I think for me, the content always precedes form. I don't really care about form at all, to be honest. And so, honestly, I think I only wrote the long poems because I had to, because there was so much information and there's no other way I could like thread all of these ideas with each other. And generally, the way a poem starts for me is that I need to understand something. And so The Last Poet in the World, I already had some of those, like a draft of like the long poem, but I also wrote another poem called The Last Poet in the World, and that's the first poem you see in the section. And so I was thinking about, I thought that if I had that one poem lead in that section, the rest of it would be like more of an exploration of the internal world of the poet. And so I wasn't really thinking about form at all. I just think about how I can put these ideas in front of the reader and have them take it in the way I want. And so that, I don't know if that makes me a good or bad poet.
Yeah. I mean, how could, who could ever, say?
I'm curious about your impulse for starting poems, Sanna, since we're talking about this, that, Farah, the impulse to understand something.
Yes.
Maybe it's kind of what originates a poem. Like, what is it for you?
Oh, I think it's usually, and I think I picked up on that too. You said it once earlier too, that, you wanted to, with the plot, you wanted to, you knew the undertaking, but you still wanted to try to understand it. You still wanted to dig into that. I find this fascinating. I'm completely deflecting your question about me and choosing to talk about Farah, but I will get there. I find that fascinating about your work in general too, the like educational scope of it, and I think that is reflected in that answer, like how you seek to understand, observe, document. Again, referencing my own style sheet. I think I wrote down that it was almost like a scientific tone. Like there was often an inquiry happening, and like that you were often writing in third person, omniscient narrator, and it gave it a quality of nonfiction in poetry, which I found so unique. I do not do that. I think I am really strongly, really always trying to understand my own experience of the world, and like a poem usually begins and then extends out maybe to touch other things, but it usually begins with a feeling that I have about my own life. And like I won't be able to process my feeling without writing the poem.
Yeah, I think part of this is processing for me, but it's also thinking. It's like it's both thinking and feeling that I'm trying to do on the page. What I'm always trying to do in my work is communicate with the reader. And so the main reason that I included the plot in the book is that I knew it felt like all of these ideas would be incomplete without talking about like the past and the reason that the world is the way it is, because the thing is, focusing just on the present and the future doesn't help us learn anything and prepare ourselves properly for what's actually to come. And so writing the plot helped me root myself in the present and in time. And I was hoping to do that for the reader too, because I think it's important to understand why we're here.
I also wanted to talk to you about, in the acknowledgement section, you brought up Solmaz Sharif as an influence on the last poet in the world, or your own thinking about the role of the poet and her work on that. And then for the plot, you brought up Fargo Twaki's essay, Notes on Craft, Writing in the Hour of Genocide, and what you're saying now about past and present and kind of being rooted in the present, or trying to root in the present while attending to the past, like through writing these long poems, reminded me of that essay a lot, and the section that they have on the long middle of revolution, this idea that it's not necessarily a relation in time, but a geographical relation of nearness or proximity to that horizon of Palestinian liberation, of anti-colonial liberation, land back, things that we were talking about. So yeah, I was just curious if you would talk more about the influence of that essay on that poem. And then also, maybe these are separate things because they're very big, I think, the influence of Solmaz Sharif on like the role of the poet and how you think about that.
I think there was also, just to add one element, it was a particular poem, Patronage.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you could talk more about that particular poem too.
Yeah, so I think that was a poem that made me really think about my role as a poet and the work that we all do, because it places poetry it like reveals the politics, basically, of like the literary world and the way that we beg for power, basically. And when she said that the poet is the poodle and we're looking for me, it's like so sad, but it's also so real, because it revealed to me what kind of power that we have in the literary world and what we could do with it, because you have to first recognize the power dynamics around you in order to actually rise against them, I think. And whether that's boycotting magazines or not, or presses, and whether or not we support different awards or authors. I think taking our power back is incredibly important, and it showed to me that poets do have power even in their immediate circles. And so that poem was the inspiration really for the last poet in the world.
I think it's a fascinating poem for how it kind of does the opposite of what we were talking about before with the snail, like where there was the protective energy. There was almost like this how do I describe it? Like a encasing, or like a displaying energy. I think you had an image somewhere in there that really stands out to me of like the poet being displayed or in a glass case somehow. And I think that just what you're sharing about this intervention that the poodle with the meat in Solmaz Sharif's poem had really makes sense, given that that poem is so invested in like debunking literary culture in a certain sense, and debunking like what we're kind of directed to strive towards, and placing it instead, and this comes back to time, like placing it instead on this grand scope of time, which is like this beautiful speculative idea of like, what if there was the last poet in the entire world, and like how could that then inform the relationship we have with being a poet now. I'm just doing a lot of thoughts.
That's
there's the line. There's I will not be buried but shipped to the last museum and exhibited underneath my Lifetime Achievement Award. Also made me think, what is the practice of poetry do for us or teach us about being in the world if the idea of prestige or achievement or begging for power, dancing like a poodle in these literary halls is no longer the motivation for pursuing like the job of poetry, maybe, or the business of poetry.
Yeah, and I think that's really also what's separated like people from poetry. I think when poets stay in their own lane and they have this one motivation of gaining prestige, it doesn't it doesn't lend itself to building up a stronger relationship between the public and poetry, because the poetry can do so much for people. And as long as there's this great division where people read poetry for different reasons and they write poetry for different reasons, it's going to be very hard to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Reminds me of this passage from George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, or a line where he says that every revolutionary is a poet. He says not every poet carries a gun, but every revolutionary is a poet. And then also there's parts about prestige, and he's like the slimy scales of prestige that kind of that fool us or trick us into pursuing like class ascension, but actually against the interests of the people, or being able to build power or have power as poets or as writers, as workers, actually.
I love this conversation we're having because it's also like making me think in twin with the plot. Like if we go back to your beautiful metaphor of thinking of them as like two main branches of this tree of this book, like how did trees factor into all of this?
Maybe if we slide towards the plot, as you said, and then come back to the tangible and the touchable. Earlier you said you love old growth forests and talking about trees. What do you love about trees?
I don't know. I love everything about trees. It's kind of hard to describe because to me, trees are sort of a monument of the past, old growth trees especially. And I think they help me, again, place myself in time. I think when I started this poem, I wanted to write about that one idea that there's a mother tree in the forest that sort of helps younger trees grow by transferring nutrients. And so I looked that up, and it's not really real. And so
so true. People do love to make up facts about trees.
That study just studies like a very small group of trees in a small area, and there's no way that actually applies to trees in general. But I think what was most important, what sort of led me on this journey, was that trees to me are like people, because they age, they grow, they live in community with other trees. And so that idea for me branched out to what we consider to be a pest, what the trees witness in the world, and that and how they communicate with each other. Yeah, it's just, for me, there are so many trees are like the center of like so many of our relationships to the land and to fire, and pardon me as I literally look through my book and my memories with trees. And I wanted to understand how they reflect our own lives and our own communities.
If there's any like passages in this long poem, like you're saying, like there's so much that this poem is doing and holding. And I feel like for me, when I write a long poem, my relationship with it kind of changes over time. There are things that like show themselves to me more, and things that kind of start to feel less important or fade into the background. I wonder if there's any passages in it that feel like closer to you right now, or any elements of that relationship between trees and what they show us about our lives, about community, about family or communication that feel like alive to you right now.
Yeah, I can read a section. Magnuson. The effects of global events, such as climate change, can be measured in time and water. Consider a human lifetime of almost 100 years. Your grandparent and child seated on either end of your dinner table. Rubber plantations, which cultivated rubber trees, scaled to a commercial level in 1902, and continue to be managed by farmers today. In Bangalore, Karnataka, where my grandfather was born in 1923, 4 British companies leased the land 10 years prior from the British Raj for a term of 999 years. This is equivalent to the lifespan of 33 rubber trees, or 40 generations of people. In 1940, the term was reduced to 99 years, and just before partition in 1947, the fracture of land into India and Pakistan, the leases were deeded to local companies. My grandfather translated Hindi to English in British classrooms before partition. He was recast as an accountant in Pakistan. Into English, some words mutated more than others. Ossified were loot, jungle, pundit. Juggernaut from Jagannath, Lord of the universe, became a mercilessly destructive force. Kushi from Khushi, happiness, became undemanding. Logocentrism, the Western value preferencing the written or spoken word over that which it is referencing, is a strategy of conquest when it comes to translation. You replace one thing with another, to speak over another voice, fronting enough meaning, to write over existing text. My grandfather passed away in 2003, nearly a decade before the British rubber plantation lease ended, nearly 60 years after paid translation. Though after the proliferation of English in Pakistan, translation rooted itself between most teeth. The first German reforestation plantation, founded in the late 18th century, had planned for production until 2050. You can log your memories until you grant the land ownership. You can rename it until it fits in your mouth. You can divide it according to property and afterlife until it sits trimmed in your palm. You can pull up the roots and see where the trenches weave through the dirt. You can cover it in stone, gravel, under the uncaring line of the cartographer, but the earth remembers.
How concrete, factual, like in this scientific register, these like historical passages are, or when you're actually talking about the world and the environment. And then often in the parts that are about money or like financial value, it moves more into this like register of like the metaphor or like lyric almost. So you think trees are real, but money is fake, like, or something.
I love when you write about your family in the book. Mm-hmm. It's like they're such like morsels. Like you're very intentional and careful about where they come up. Like I was thinking earlier when you were talking about this one passage in the plot where you're seeing maybe a photo of yourself as a child near a huge stump. Like it was like a giant stump, and just saying like your mother warned you to be careful of the beings of fire, jinn. Or like here when you're talking about, or the narrator, sorry, my classic issue where I'm like, it's you, right? But, you know, referencing a personal history alongside so much more like empirical factual data is so fascinating to me, and how it still contains like this register that you're kind of alluding to, Jody, like of just like mattering in the same way, which I think is part of the politics of your work too. That like when you talk about the trees as people, it's like my people too, like our histories. I think I really would love. I also remember feeling fascinated by how translation came up in the plot, and I think one question we haven't asked is about the obvious double entendre of the title, because like the plot of a novel or like the plot of a poem, the plot of a tree, I'm curious how you threaded literary questions into that poem.
It's actually a triple entendre because a scheme or a plot.
A plot.
Yeah.
Like a
Plot.
plotting.
Yeah, plotting.
Oh, it's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
So that's why for me this word was perfect because it covered all like three main threads of what I wanted to talk about: the trees, intention, and like a narrative arc of history that we know.
And all of this in light of the last line, also, like to be the lords of our own desperate little plots. To end on that note.
I was reading this essay the other day by Viet Thanh. I forget his last name, but he wrote The Sympathizer. Yeah. Yes. So in it, he talks about how the West is now, the Western literature is now like an imperial, like a soft imperial power the way British literature used to be in the colonies. And so I wanted to talk about how the stories we tell of the past and the present, as well as through the literature that's been like placed in the colonies and taught there, I wanted to explore how that affects how we think about these countries and how we think about the West.
Was there a narrative model that you had in mind kind of for that third thread of like thinking about, the arc of history, or like how are you thinking about that in relation to how you wanted the reader to come across information in this poem or learn things with you?
I think that I wanted to question how we receive these stories and narratives, and especially because in that essay we mentioned earlier, the writing craft in a time of genocide, Fargo mentions witness, and also this playwright Augustus Boal, who wrote The Theater of the Oppressed, and in it he questions like the root of Western narratives, which was Western theater, from which is the basis for a lot of these Western stories, and over time they've obviously evolved. But what Augustus Boal basically interrogates is the way that the audience, or like the receivers of narrative and story, they are expected to just to witness and to just not be a part of the story and accept that this is something that is happening to them and that they have no part in it, the way that we watch global events or even local events happen, and we feel fine being passive towards them as bystanders and as people who just witness cruelty and evil in the world. These narratives and the canon shapes how we think and how we perceive the world. It propels us into this very narrow box of individualism. And that's sort of how I ended the book, the section, with this very pointed line about how we love to be the lords of our own little plots, whether it's the very short narratives of our lives, which should be like, 80 to 100 years now, and our own, like our very own local, not even our community, like the plot of our home, of our houses, or the 18 square feet of our 1800, not
2 square feet of our Toronto apartments.
Yes, the 2 square feet of our
little dog crate condos.
Yeah. And of course, to reference a third entendre,
like the stories of our lives.
Yes, and our schemes.
Yeah, what you're saying just now, and coming back to that essay too, I think there's a line about the role of poetry being to gather us, and what you're saying about poetry propelling into action, thinking about the work on the page that the poet is doing as one front in our solidarity or one front in cultural war. And then, of course, about, Augusta Boal and Theater of the Oppressed. Are there other poems in the book where you're thinking really pointedly in that way about gathering the reader into participating in the creation of a new kind of story, one that's not this imperial narrative?
Yeah, I think I touch on this. The Whale is also the last poem that I wrote in the book, and I actually wrote that after the plot. And that was sort of my last chance to bring positivity into the book, but also show that we have agency and we have the power to form a new kind of future.
I'm curious what feels really alive in the book right now. Actually, what are you, and of course publishing a book, going through the process of promotion, going through all of the life cycles of the literary things that we've kind of talked about in theory, now having lived through many of them and practiced them. What are you kind of learning from your own book right now? What's really feeling vibrant?
Honestly, I don't know. This book honestly only started feeling real to me last night. I was like rereading the book, and there's this one section in The Last Poet in the World, and I was thinking, oh, I didn't think anybody would read this, but now it's in everybody's hands. And so I guess what's feeling alive for me in the book is the vulnerability, I guess, that I showed in it, because I wouldn't say that I'm openly vulnerable a lot. And so it's feeling good to me in a way that I feel like it makes it easier for others to connect to what I was going through when I was writing the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and sharing about Shadow Press.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I'm glad. Wonderful. Okay. Cool.
Bing bong.
So punctual. Sorry, I only did comments, no questions today. I felt like that guy in the audience.
I have a question.
You know the guy in the audience who's like, I have a question, and then he doesn't ask a question.
Oh yeah.
That was me.
Just like, this is what I think.
I was like, this is
what I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah. Honestly, even like I'm just so bad at talking about these long poems because I felt like I was going through that whole process so long ago.
Yeah.
And there was just so much in it that I was thinking about at the time that it's kind of hard to bring together in my head.
Of course.
Yeah.
I also feel like the experience of writing a long poem is so different from like reading a long poem. Like as a reader, I feel like it's easier for me to look at the different sections and be like, da, da, da. But when I've written a long poem, it kind of just like condenses into like one acorn of like experience or something.
Yes.
It's actually hard to be like, oh yeah, on this page or on this. It's just one thing.
Yeah.
It's like 40 pages for you. Like,
no, exactly. And like a single poem holds so much. Like we were reading The Snail, we were talking through so much. So it makes sense that when you have a poem that is like the length of 20, 25 pages, that it would feel hard to hold. Especially because you put so much in it.
Yeah.
So
you're gonna have to cut so many pauses out.
That's